Hello, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to this side event on strengthening partnership enabling factors to foster transformative change. This is part of a global campaign towards building up effective collaboration, both towards and beyond the SDG 2030 goals. And this campaign is all about raising awareness and sparking investment in the enabling environment to help make partnerships happen at scale. It is brought to you by Partnerships 2030, UNDESA, the Partnering Initiative, Global Forum for National SDG Advisory Bodies, and the campaign is kindly supported by the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. And I'm delighted that we will start off with an introduction from the Ministry by Mr. Daniel Haas, who's a head of division at the Ministry. Welcome, Daniel. Thank you very much for joining, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Darian, dear ladies and gentlemen, and dear participants. I would also like to use the chance to welcome you to this side event. I may repeat the title, Strengthening Partnerships, Partnership Enabling Factors to Foster Transformative Change, a global campaign towards and beyond the 2023 SDG Summit in the context of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe Regional Forum. Let me start by saying that partnerships and collaboration across all sectors of society, from our view, is fundamental to delivering the SDGs. As stipulated in SDG 17, partnerships and especially multi-stakeholder partnerships, so-called MSPs, are an important instrument of the implementation and collaboration processes that are necessary to achieve widespread transformational change. Let's consider a very good example. And this example is the Prevent Waste Alliance. Cities and municipalities must not be allowed to drown in waste. The Prevent Waste Alliance is committed to preventing this. It's pointing out ways how MSPs can protect cities and rural regions on a sustainable basis and thereby work towards SDG 11, one of this year's focus SDGs at the high-level political forum in New York. This very fast-growing Prevent Waste Alliance, which counts now over 400 members, is a platform where public institutions, the private sector, academia, and civil society jointly engage to minimize waste, to eliminate pollutants, and maximize the reuse of resources in the economy worldwide. The shared aim of this MSP is, and the members of Prevent, is to instigate a sustainable circular economy in the global south, to conserve the natural resources, to protect the climate and biodiversity, and at the same time create new sustainable industries and also green jobs. To achieve these goals, Prevent members connect different perspectives along global value chains. They share knowledge, they pilot scalable solutions for the circular economy. This MSP and many others around the world are making important contributions to achieving the SDGs. MSPs are able to achieve transformation through coordinated action, with individual actors would not be able to achieve by themselves in many cases. Partnerships can play a crucial role by bringing stakeholders together, transferring knowledge and kickstarting debate, and also develop solutions for the challenges we all face. And this is the reason why the German government is involved in about 100 different multi-stakeholder partnerships, many of them with funding or participation by the ministry which I'm presenting here, the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ. However, implementing partnerships and especially multi-stakeholder partnerships is by no means an easy task. There are many challenges, and further scaling up of successful approaches is critical. In addition to supporting many multi-stakeholder partnerships, BMZ has therefore commissioned the GIZ project called Partnership 2030. The team at Partnership 2030 offers information on how to run MSPs effectively. It provides training and learning opportunities, as well as bespoke support and advice. This year, as Darian has also mentioned already, Partnership 2030 together with 3 partners, namely the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, UNDESA, with the Partnering Initiative, and thirdly, the Global Forum on National SDG Advisory Bodies is running a global partnership campaign. And this campaign aims at gathering learning experiences from different stakeholders and from different regions. It aims at raising awareness on the importance of partnerships. And finally, it aims at identifying partnership enabling factors to strengthen MSPs worldwide, to make them more efficient and to also better support them. The campaign already was officially launched at the end of January during the ECOSOC Partnership Forum. It includes a series of virtual and in-person events for different audiences, and events like this one today will be held also at the UN Regional Forum and at the margins of the high-level political forum in July. The finding from those events, along with a global survey, will be used then finally to inform a study on partnerships and their enabling factors, challenges, and opportunities. And finally, the campaign is planned to culminate in a partnership symposium in New York at the margins of the SDG Summit, where we then will also see the study being presented. In line with the campaign, the event today will now zoom in on selected enabling factors, on lessons learned, on successful multi-stakeholder partnership examples from the UNECE region. And I hope that the interactive exchange, which will follow now, will give you the opportunity to gather new insights, but also to share your own experiences on what role partnerships in the UNECE region can play in strengthening SDG implementation globally. So, dear colleagues, let me conclude by reiterating that partnerships are about very diverse stakeholders contributing their experience and resources. Only by working together, we can hope to push forward the agenda on the SDG implementation. And it's my sincere hope that this campaign and this event today is one of the many building blocks on our pathway to that highly desirable future. So thank you very much and all success with this side event. Thank you.
Daniel, thank you very much indeed for that wonderful framing of today's event, and indeed for your support for the campaign as a whole. So my name is Darian Stibbe. I'm the Executive Director of the Partnering Initiative. And as you've heard, we're one of the partners behind this MSP campaign. And we've been working for the last 20 years or so to really help to drive effective collaboration, of course, most recently for the SDGs, but SDGs and beyond, looking at climate goals and whatever replaces the SDGs. And as we've been hearing, the challenge is that the collaboration and partnerships are hard. They don't just happen. They require a significant investment in all sorts of areas, from the individual partnering skills that are needed in order to be able to build collaborations, but through organizations to become institutionally fit for partnering, is how we term it. Having in place the right strategies and leadership and systems and processes to actually be externally looking and externally engaging in partnerships. But we also need to see partnerships built to much more sort of effective good practice standards. But also, if we're going to actually scale up partnerships, we need the mechanisms, the platforms that are in place to be able to make that happen. But even that's not enough, because if we need to look at sort of the wider enabling environment for collaboration and partnership, understanding the different factors in terms of how programs and projects and partnerships are funded, or even looking at how governments are putting in place policies and regulations that could be supportive of collaboration, or we see often cases that policies simply do not allow collaboration between government and others. And if we are going to achieve the potential of partnerships for the SDGs, then we need to be looking at all of these different levels and more. And the purpose of today's discussion is really to get into some detail and bring together the wisdom of the crowds, if you like, to really begin to understand two elements here. The first question is really, if we're going to foster partnerships for the SDGs and beyond at scale, what are those investments that we need to make in the engagement mechanisms, in the organizational, institutional capabilities? What does the pro-partnering enabling environment look like that can help to systematically scale the use of partnerships for the SDGs? And then the second question is really a very essential question right now, which is about business and sustainable and responsible business. And particularly at a time when we're seeing more and more regulation, particularly within Europe around ESG, environmental, social and governance of business. What is the role that multi-stakeholder partnerships can play in supporting sustainable business practice? How can we ensure that the way that business operates and the product and services that it sells is pro-society and pro-environment, in order that we can collectively achieve that overall goal of business that is prosperous, a society that is thriving, and an environment that is healthy and thriving as well? The way that we're going to do this is we're going to have two sections to this side event. The first one is going to be a panel discussion. I shall introduce the panelists shortly, followed by breakout rooms in which you get an opportunity to get sort of really in-depth discussions from all the participants here today. I should say that as we go, please do feel free to put into the chat as many comments or thoughts or questions to the panel as we go, and we'll try to introduce those very much into a conversation. So I'm going to ask my panelists to join, and maybe my colleagues could add my panelists to the spotlight as we go. And my panelists here today, I'm delighted we have Flynn Labus, who is the Managing Director of FSG and is a real specialist in the whole of the ESG agenda. We have Suzanne Seltz, a colleague from Partnerships 2030 that you heard about earlier, one of the partners behind this whole MSP campaign. We have Martin Schmidt from SOS Children's Villages, who is also working very strongly around a partnership called Youth Can. We look forward to hearing more about that. And I'm delighted also we're joined by Simon Springett, who is the United Nations Resident Coordinator for Moldova. I'm going to ask that we start off by just asking everybody just briefly introduce themselves and how this questions about scaling partnerships, or the questions around how multi-stakeholder partnerships can deliver greater business sustainability and business responsibility, how it intersects with your work. So maybe if we can just, in fact, start with Suzanne as a fellow organizer of today's event. Tell us a little bit about you and Partnerships 2030.
Thank you, Darian. It's a pleasure to be here, and welcome also. I'm very happy to see all the participants in the room, and I hope you will find the event useful for your work. So my name is Susanne Salz. I'm heading the Partnerships 2030 team based at GIZ, Germany's International Cooperation Agency. The project is funded by BMZ, who we heard from earlier. We've been around since 2015, so when the 2030 agenda was also passed, and BMZ and the German government thought, okay, if we as Germany and we as international community with SDG 17 once again so strongly emphasize that we want to work more in partnerships, in fact, that we need to work more in partnerships to reach all the sustainable development goals, then with Partnerships 2030, it's BMZ's wish to provide advice and support around partnerships. So we have a website, www.partnerships2030.org, where you find a number of publications and resources by us and also by others like the Partnering Initiative that hopefully help partnerships to run effectively. We also provide training. In fact, keep your eyes out for a free web-based training for about 1 hour giving basics on partnerships that's going to come out in a few months. And we also provide bespoke advice to individual partnerships. So we've worked, for example, with Martin's colleagues at the SOS Children's Villages who are partnering, and we'll hear more about that, and many other partnerships. And we find that it's helpful to them to not have to reinvent the wheel, but via us to be able to learn from other partnerships and what they have found were success factors and sort of challenges they faced and how to overcome them. So yeah, maybe Darian, I'll stop there for now, but you know me, I can always talk more.
Thanks, Susanna. That's a perfect initial introduction. Simon, I wonder if I could come to you next and sort of hear how all of these multi-stakeholder partnerships intersect with your world.
Right. Well, thanks very much, Darian. As you said in the introduction, I'm currently the United Nations Resident Coordinator in the Republic of Moldova. And I think the UN, like all of us, we don't work in isolation. And clearly everything we do, regardless of our positions or organizations, partnerships are foundational for our success. With the UN, my UN country team, I have 24 UN agencies working with me here in Moldova. All of them have partnerships across government, NGOs, academia, private sector, international financial institution, and the list goes on and on. And many of these agencies, funds, and programs, they also have partners that are both overlapping and intersecting, which really creates a level of complexity that can be quite complicated. However, we really have very little choice because there's almost nothing that we do that's outside of a partnership. Of course, there's large numbers of internal and external engagement mechanisms and platforms, all of which, as Darian said, takes considerable investment, both human resources, but also cultural investment and coordination. And many times, I think many of us will see that, a lot of times people turn up for coordination meetings, but they're actually not invested in building that coordination and cooperation. So, the stronger the coordination is, the more opportunity those coordinations have to plant the seeds and to grow partnerships. And I really liked what Darian said at the beginning, and I hadn't heard it before, but fit for partnership. That's really an exceptionally important way of looking at it.
Great.
Also, given the variety of partners and partnership, the number of our engagements, they also need to be very tailored, because clearly how you work with the private sector is different than how you work with parliament and banks and embassies and government and civil societies. Every sector has their own language, their own culture, which in terms of partnerships, does create some challenges. I think, we all enter it that we all want to see the same end state, but sometimes we really can struggle to show each other that, simply because we're just not using the same language. And then how do we take this to scale?
Well, Simon, can I interrupt there? Because
yes, please.
I'll come back to you in just a moment. That was a really, really good introduction, but I don't want us to get too far ahead. We'll come back to you in just a moment, because what you're saying is absolutely fascinating. But thank you. Can I go straight to Flynn? And just this sort of introduction to you, FSG, and this whole debate.
Thank you, Darian, and thank you everybody for making the time for this important topic today. Totally agreeing with a lot of the points that Simon's already making and Susanna's already shared. But my name is Flynn Liebus. I'm a managing director at a social impact advisory firm called FSG. We're a non-profit and we're founded by the business professor Michael Porter over 20 years ago, and we're based in Europe, Asia, and the US. I co-lead our gender equity practice and have first-hand experience of actually designing, implementing and facilitating and actually evaluating multi-stakeholder collaborations. So certainly know the pain that Darian was talking about, but also the upside, and starting to get a bit more into the tactics. FSG's purpose is to contribute to shaping more inclusive and regenerative societies. And our role, we feel, is contributing to shaping market systems, so the systems within which we're operating. And so that means actually exploiting and manipulating the incentives, to Simon's point around trying to get people invested in these things, or the carrots and the sticks. And essentially our work brings together corporates, brings in diversity, equity, inclusion, but also experiencing place-based and global level collective impact capabilities. So to the point earlier around being able to speak to those different languages. Today I'm going to wear a bit of a company hat. So to Darian's point about wanting to think about how we engage business. And essentially the work that we've done with companies has really been a legacy of how do we create competitive advantage and differentiation by addressing unmet needs in the social and environmental sector, leveraging CSR, corporate social responsibility, sustainability, but also trying to get this into company strategy. And so the question when you get to a company is, why partner? And I think that's what we can be really important to get into today, because there's either direct competitive advantage and you don't have the skills in-house, so how do you actually do that? How do you obtain those? Or are there pre-competitive plays which actually shifts in the system would benefit many businesses, but actually it's too expensive or it doesn't make quite sense to be the first mover? And so what are those different pre-competitive opportunities, and actually how do we drive and leverage multi-stakeholder collaboration for those particular problems? So I'll hand back to Darian and look forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Flynn. That's a great framing of the discussion to come as well. Thank you so much. Martin, tell us about yourself. Tell us about Youth Can.
Okay, hello everyone, and many thanks for the invitation. So my name is Martin Schmidt. I'm based in Vienna, Austria, and I'm working for SOS Children's Villages, which is the world's largest non-governmental organization focused on supporting children and young people without parental care and families at risk. And yeah, regarding myself, actually, just for the context shortly, I started off my career in the corporate sector and working on the implementation of corporate social responsibility activities that were very much focused on youth empowerment topics already. And I got the chance to move to SOS Children's Villages and get engaged within the Youth Can initiative, which is SOS Children's Villages Global Partnership for Youth Employability and Entrepreneurship. And I also have the great honor to represent this one today. And yeah, maybe just giving a little bit of context. So Youth Can is a multi-stakeholder partnership between SOS Children's Villages, corporate/company partners, very important young people, and governmental institutions. And jointly, we're aiming to tackle the global challenge of youth unemployment. And maybe to explain the project in very short, I would like to take you all in the audience on a little journey back to the start of your professional careers. Yeah. Especially when transitioning into the world of work, these professional networks and role models, very often linked to family environments, are a central factor for success. We all know that. We need someone to guide us, to mentor us, to help us to decide which direction to take. Maybe also people to introduce us to the first job. And maybe also someone to show us how to interact in professional environments. And we as SOS Children's Villages are working together with children and young people that lack this adequate parental care family networks coming from vulnerable socioeconomic backgrounds. And thus we need, for exactly those, we need to bridge those networks for the young people. We need to give young people access to role models and mentors that guide them. And to do so, we're partnering up. Volunteers from company partners engage as mentors, trainers for the young people. They're working together with them. They're also giving young people the chance for the first professional job experiences. And yeah, over the years, we have seen that this engagement has a huge impact, of course, on the young people's perspective to successfully transition into economic self-reliance. But also, and this is very important, the volunteers on the other side report higher satisfaction with their job, leading to stronger commitment to the employer. Yeah. So Youth Can, in this regard, is a very successful example on how cross-sectoral partnerships can lead to an added value for all the parties involved and actually jointly tackling several SDGs.
Great, thank you so much. And yes, we'll be asking you more a little bit in a short while about what could have made it easier for developing these partnerships. What would those enabling factors have been that could have been in place? In fact, let's start with this. I'm going to start with you, Simon, just building on what you were saying. this idea of these mechanisms for engagement and sort of stakeholder engagement, and just you started to paint a bit of a picture, because at the country level, just you have the RCO, the Resident Coordinator Office, and you chair the UN country team, which is all the different UN agencies. And of course, you work very closely with the government, and you collectively create a cooperation framework with the government. How do you or the government engage or the UN country team or the agencies? How are they then engaging business, engaging NGOs, engaging communities? What sort of mechanisms do you have in place?
Thanks, Darian. I'll try to be brief this time. I think last year we engaged with more than 150 different either implementing or cooperating partners, and we're a relatively small country. But I think we foundationally, one of our core tasks is to make sure that no one is left behind. So no one is left behind in terms of development policies. No one is left behind in terms of government legislative policy processes. So we feel that it's hugely important that we're able to either give voice or agency where others aren't able to, and where those partners are able to, we help to either give them a platform or to amplify their voices. Government also has a very difficult process in that they need to find ways to have consultative processes across civil society as they develop strategies and policy, develop legislation, and in some areas, supporting NGOs and others to provide citizens services. The government also has a very difficult task in that, they have to find some way to coordinate us. And I say it's difficult because, we're not always the best coordination partners, even with our best intent. We are all working to do the very best to support the government, but sometimes, that support isn't always done in the most externally partnership focused role outside of government. So we also need to recognize that there is support requirement for the government. So one of the things I do is I manage a number of coordination mechanisms in support of the government, but also we have a number of thematic groups that we can use to bring in the views and the opinions of others. And I'll end here so we can have a bit of more of a conversation, but I wanted to mention one thing while I had the opportunity. And one is that as we develop these partnerships or grow these partnerships, that the language, it really does matter. And partnerships are really around mutual understanding and respect. And we know all too well how many operational partnerships are based on who's funding and who's delivering, this kind of donor beneficiary relationship. As the private sector is viewed as an up and coming means of support, but it doesn't need to be that way. It needs to be focused on how we can all collectively work together in a partnership. And then also to say, and this is a kind of a pet peeve of mine, and I'd like to say is that, when we develop partnerships, we're developing partnerships to work with people and communities. We don't work in the field. We don't work on the ground. We actually work with people and individuals. And if we talk about countries as some kind of external third party, we're never going to be able to grow partnerships that are meaningful. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Simon. I think you're absolutely right to bring in that last point. We do need to focus on the people and the communities. And also around, it's good to hear about these various engagement mechanisms that the government has for the various different civil society organizations. And we see in depending on where you are in the world, which country you're in, more or less levels of ambition and sophistication for these sorts of platforms, from platforms which really are about consulting different sectors of society, through to platforms which really are about catalyzing collaborations and partnerships around particular issues. And Suzanne, I know that Partnerships 2030 has a program which looks a little bit at these types of platforms. I'm wondering if you could sort of say a little bit more about what you've seen in terms of these mechanisms for engagement of stakeholders and the catalysis of partnerships.
Yeah, certainly. There are some, as we might call them, partnership platforms around the world that help to catalyze and support partnerships, how to get started, how to build the governance structures, how to measure and evaluate progress, etc. Some that are sort of global and generic, some that are more specific to particular regions or topics. We have some listed on our website. We'll update that a little bit indeed soon to show what there is around the world. And then I also wanted to pick up on some of the points that Simon and others made earlier about coordination meetings and shared aims and activities. And in our experience, it's important to keep in mind the, if you will, different DNA of different stakeholders. So the public sector, like Simon was saying, has a certain role and mandate. And like we have representatives here that are more from the private sector side and the NGO side. And by nature, their makeup, but also their structural aims tend to be different. And then how to actually combine that and bring that together, find shared goals and really implement them and reach sort of more than the sum of the parts together is not easy. And structures tend to help for that. And for that, the individual and the organizational or partnership level, actually all three and others, are important.
And just while we've got a question in actually for Simon, just while because it was kind of bridges a couple of different things. It's a really good question. Moldova is considered, has a considerable Roma community. Very often they're not either engaged or their voices are used to suit different political agendas. How do you make sure that marginalized voices are included in the partnerships in a meaningful and equitable way? So it'd be good, Simon, just to get your immediate thoughts on that. And then actually, Suzanne, from your experiences again, about bringing in those voices. Simon.
Yeah, I can give two very brief examples. One is we've created a database on what we call our common country analysis, which publishes data on groups that are at risk of being left behind. So there is actually a little bit of visibility about the plight of some of the Roma communities. And another brief example is that we've set up a number of Roma mediator structures. So we have trained Roma mediators in communities who can engage with non-Roma aspects of the government to try to come to solutions where there's complexities or issues.
Thank you. No, it sounds like you have these structures in place. Suzanne, a sort of more general question then about how do you engage the most marginalized, the ones that tend not to have a voice, tend not to be the ones that sort of come to the meetings because they wouldn't necessarily even know about them. Are there ways that you've seen that platforms are able to reach those people?
It's definitely very challenging. Structures can help. So for example, you might have governance meetings where the different stakeholder groups all have equal number of representatives and have to decide anonymously so that no group can be, every group has a voice and you can't have some groups deciding also for the others. But we find that in partnership practice and also in academia and research, there's not a perfect solution yet. There are some sort of good practices, but it remains difficult. So it's actually a topic we want to look at in more detail later this year and have some practitioner exchanges with expert input to learn from it with each other, how we can do that even better, because it's something that's very important, of course, as we probably all agree. And I also wonder, Martin or Darian, if Martin can elaborate a little bit how they actually bring the youth voice into how the partnership is run, because Martin, I think you do that and it might be an interesting example, right?
Yeah, thank you very much, Susanne. I actually just wanted to mention that. So in our case, what we did, we created a youth advisory board, to bring the young people, especially as an important voice, centrally into the program design, what we do. And yeah, it needs this dedicated space, yeah, that has been created. It needs investment, yeah. For example, in our case, we need to work with young people. We have to prepare them for their inputs, but it definitely pays off, yeah. And we have now implemented our so-called youth advisory board for more than 2 years, and we can see a huge benefit for the program overall, yeah. And also giving the young people, in our case, a voice strengthens their capabilities to actually advocate for themselves, yeah. So it's about also bringing the direct beneficiaries of the programs, giving them a space, giving them opportunities to raise the interest and collaborate, yeah.
No, thank you. And I think that's exactly the point, is you are very deliberate about making it happen. You are investing in making it happen. You're investing to financially to bring people together, to be out there, to get the views, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's an essential part of it. Maybe we could just move a little bit towards this, the sort of the concept of ESG and responsible sustainable business. And Flynn, I wonder if you could just give us a very quick briefing, if you like, on what is this European legislation in terms of what effect it may have on business, and then how you see multi-stakeholder partnerships. Then, just building on what you said, you introduced yourself with. Why are they essential in order for business to be able to be more sustainable?
Thanks, Darian. If I had the answer to that, I'll do my best. So ESG, people have probably seen it sort of popping up a lot more in the news, particularly in the last recent months as things are being debated, particularly in US contexts, but increasingly, in Europe. So environment, social and governance is historically been more really thinking about how are investors rating businesses and what are businesses reporting to inform, important stakeholders such as civil society, investors, and shareholders. And as the sort of ESG movement has gained greater momentum, so has the reporting. And so I think there's an important distinction between ESG reporting, which is what companies do at the end of the year. It might be in their sustainability reports, and actually what people have really been also focused around, which is around value creation. What are companies actually doing to perform better by addressing unmet social needs in society through environment and social good? And we're starting to see those sort of risk mitigation and value creation worlds come together. But I think ESG is starting to become a bit of a catch-all for corporate social responsibility. Some of the things that Martin was sharing around employee engagement, NGO partnership, bilateral partnership, and working towards the SDGs. So just wanted to sort of give that up front. In terms of the European corporate sustainability due diligence and the current shifts in regulation there that's being considered, essentially what that's really about is, to what extent can we have a shared framework or guiding framework that helps companies that are essentially very large, so those with over, I think, 500 million revenue, and essentially having more inclusive and sustainable global value chains. So this is really what that's about. So there's obviously lots more to ESG than global value chains, but this is something that the European governance is really thinking about as being an area that we want to get greater transparency, greater consistency, and greater alignment, at least in terms of language and what we're trying to focus on. And so what does this really mean for companies that are large enough to have to be required to undertake these due diligence exercises? Well, essentially, it's going to require a greater amount of companies' time and effort to actually ensure that they understand what their value chains are, that there actually is transparency, and actually starting to understand and get behind, like, what are the pain points and what are the sort of challenges, particularly with regards to human rights, sort of, poor working conditions, people being exploited, making sure that's not happening in their value chains, but also ensuring that there's not environmental degradation through different practices. And so some of the industries that have been particularly prioritized in this directive are ag, mining, and textiles. So people on this call may be more familiar with some of these industries than others. And I think from our side, there's obviously the risk mitigation, the do no harm, the minimum that companies need to really be aware of what's happening in their value chain. And then I guess the question is then, to what extent is there actually opportunities from this legislation coming in to really encourage companies to innovate and to really think about how they can actually ensure that they've got safe and sustainable supply chains, but are also understanding how to change them if they don't. And so I think one of the things that we really feel is a big opportunity is actually how do we understand the economics of driving change and what the economics that sit behind a partnership. And so just to give a concrete example, we've been working for the last 3 years with a set of multinational companies that all have sugar in their supply chain. The sugar supply chain in Mexico has got a lot of issues with regards to human rights abuses, inequalities in pay, lower variable productivity depending on different times in the year. And essentially we convened a set of actors, both government, company, but also understanding different actors along the value chain to actually identify where the inequities were and where the actual challenges are in terms of human rights abuses, and essentially money talks. So really understanding where those breakdowns were. And essentially what we found were there was particular points in the value chain, particular groups of people. So to Simon's point, in small communities, rural communities in Mexico, there's particular migrant workers that are responsible for cutting down the sugar cane, and essentially there's not equal pay, there's discrepancy, lack of transparency. And essentially over these 3 years we went from having a group of companies and organizations committed in some way or have some vested interest in actually driving change to actually figuring out what are the specific interventions that we need along the value chain and within that specific group to actually improve outcomes for that particular for sugar cutters. And so essentially we came up with collectively that we needed a new equitable compensation model for cutters, and that would increase productivity, it would increase the quality of the cutting, and also reduce labour shortages, and along with that reducing the secondary sort of human rights abuses and inequities in pay. And essentially that took a long time, to Darian's point, a lot of time to actually go through all of that. But essentially the difference to other efforts that we've done with other multi-stakeholder partnerships was actually understanding and then evaluating and tracking how are we changing the economic dynamics within that value chain to ensure that those changes are sustainable, so people are getting paid and actually you're then starting to reap the benefits for you as an employee, as a sugar cutter, but also upstream for the big multinational companies, they're actually getting better sugar productivity, and also knowing that there's greater safe working conditions and equitable working conditions in the value chain. So that's the type of multi-stakeholder partnership that we would want to see coming out of in response to the European directive. But I think we'll get to Darian's point later about how these things are hard, and I can share some of the challenges that we faced with that. But essentially it's around understanding the economics of impact and profitability to the extent possible in these contexts.
Thank you so much, Finn. It's really great to have an example. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Martin a question, but it's going to be the same question to you, really. So I'll start with Martin, then come back to you, Flynn, if that's okay. So Martin, the question is really this, that sometimes these partnerships are difficult to develop, and how do we make it easier? It's the central question. How do we, if we're going to scale up the use of these partnerships for the SDGs, we need to create some sort of an environment in which they can develop much faster and more effectively. So Martin, what would you say would be some key things that could have helped your partnership develop faster, perhaps? And then Flynn, will come back to you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. Maybe let me start off being very honest that also from our experience, it's not easy to bring different parties from different sectors together on one table and start collaborating. Yeah, it's also a lot of mindset change that have to happen, moving away from this competition mindset actually to a mindset of collaboration, co-creation. And in the end, it's pretty clear we should not see each other as competitors at all, especially when working towards the achievement of SDGs. But we should see each other as partners with similar interests. And yeah, what helped us in order to achieve this? To start off with, it's very important to create mutual trust and understanding. Yeah, it's not easy to achieve, especially in the beginning of new partnerships, and it requires investments. That's clear, and full commitment from all sides. And this also implies the full support, investment from management teams, from decision-making level. And yeah, we in UFCAN have applied this concept of collaboration for a longer time already. So for example, on the global level, we bring together our company partners. We put them on one table physically. We let them align on similar strategies. This is also happening with the support of Partnerships 230 on the national level, where we coordinate joint action planning activities, where the partners collaborate and bring in their individual strengths, and finally create programs with a more holistic approach that targets the needs of the young people. And maybe as a final point, and this is most related to your question, Darian, we have learned that over times that sometimes it needs a moderation to bring the different worlds together. You know that we already heard that. It feels like we're talking different languages, and this even happens within different departments, for example, of my organization. And we need those translators, those mediators that can bring the different sides together. And yeah, to sum up with, I would just want to highlight one thing. It's very clear SDGs cannot be achieved if we work in silos. We have to work together. We have to sit on one table. We have to unite forces. And yeah, there is one famous saying that I very much like, and that always comes to my head. It may seem like that alone we walk faster, but in the end, like together, we will definitely get closer to where we aim to be.
Yeah, and I think what we're trying to do is see how we can walk together faster, and that's what this is all about, I think. And thank you for that. And yes, clearly the role of an independent organization or neutral organization to help support the development, to be able to moderate this as well. I'm just going to follow up. If all the people who were involved in these partnerships all had a common language around what partnerships are and a common understanding of partnering processes to understand what that would look like, and a common understanding around the common pitfalls of collaboration, and had certain knowledge and skills for partnering, would that also help?
Going to me, Darian, this question?
Yes, Martin, yes, just a quick follow-up question on that.
Yeah, I mean, one point maybe, Darian, that comes to my head right away. I don't think it's necessarily important that we start to talk the same language. This is maybe something that we don't even want to achieve, because it's a great benefits that we bring on in our different perspectives. Yeah. But clearly, this is this process we have to walk through, where we have to invest into. And Darian, this is maybe the point that I just want to mention and to highlight again. We need this investment. We have to put resources, we have to dedicate time, and we have to commit to make it happen. And this is maybe the most important point, actually.
Right. Thank you, Martin. So coming then to you, Flynn, what are the key enablers that could be put in place to support the type of initiatives you're talking about, but make them happen faster, more effectively?
Thank you, Darian. Just to your point before about common language, I'd say absolutely. In terms of that, I think one of the things FSG published quite a long time ago was around collective impact, and essentially the 5 key. They just are trying to distill 5 key practices, and I think that was an initial enabler for different organizations to be able to broker that conversation. But in terms of going beyond that initial common language, I think for us, to Martin's point, those third-party moderators or mediators, essentially organizations like I imagine Partnering Initiative or FSG, essentially we are sometimes see ourselves as being that initial, especially in the beginning, when everything's not quite clear, the articulation of precisely of what the problem is, and the shared, like, it's kind of all amorphous, it's different systems, it's different interests. How do you all start to bring that together to be concise and clear and understood? So there's something around like creating the space for multidisciplinary teams to actually be able to come together and moderate that. I think for us, though, it's really the process of collaboration that is always underfinanced. So if you're the connective tissue, essentially you often aren't sufficiently remunerated. And what's also important to drive that is capabilities to actually do analysis, data collection, and actually generate points of information that actually are able to drive forward the rationale and raison d'etre of a partnership to keep people coming back to the table and ensuring that there's a reason to work together, be that a business case, a ecosystem investment case, or whatever it is in terms of the, you know, the rationale for partnership. And I think essentially one of the things that we see is we often see market failures or breakdowns or opportunities for actually bringing different parts of the system together. But then who do you go to in order to say, hey, we see that failure, we actually think we can bring people together. It hasn't necessarily come to, you know, people's attention, or people aren't quite aligned, but who's actually doing that? And I think one of the gaps is actually having clear financing for those initial opportunities for getting things set up. I think ultimately you then transition to the right organizations in the system that take those elements forward. But for me, it'd be a go-to in terms of support for establishing and enabling those pre-competitive conversations. And then also a recognition that, to Simon's point, even within organizations, people aren't talking the same language and their incentives aren't aligned. So, for example, I was talking to a multinational company last week, and they were essentially saying, yeah, you know, our team doesn't really talk to this other team, and they don't really talk to this other team. And you're like, our individual objective settings are not in any way incentivized to be connected. And that's even within an organization. And so essentially we need to recognize that, and also be trying to support that partnership within an organization as well as between different organizations. And I think in terms of the capabilities, I think that also is how do we incentivize and encourage that? That's a different question.
Yeah, no, thank you, Flynn. I think we found something very similar, that actually for organizations to be institutionally fit for partnering, one of the key indicators is the internal collaboration across silos. And particularly, you know, Simon, I feel your pain with the UN system when you have different agencies which do have their own agendas. It's not all beautifully lined up, and in any system there's competition as well, which makes it quite challenging to make these things happen. And thank you also for the point about the funding issue, because that is a serious challenge. No one wants to fund the intermediaries. No one wants to fund process. They just want you to come together and have this beautiful, perfect partnership all ready to be funded, and then you can apply for funds. So I think there is a definite requirement and a shift in the way that funders are trying to catalyze and support partnerships by actually funding that process, in the process of coming together and developing collaborations around specific areas, specific issues. Thank you so much, panel. I mean, we could continue, I know, for a considerable amount of time, but we are going to move to breakout rooms in just a moment. But I would if you could, out of the four of you, I want you to say one thing that you would shift in the current system or current environment at whatever level, from the individual competencies through the platforms, through organizations being set up to partner, through the funding mechanisms, etc., etc. What do you think, in 30 seconds each, would be the key thing that you would change? And whoever comes off mute first, you get to start.
I'll make an attempt. I think many times partnerships are a byproduct of an opportunity, rather than creating partnerships to deliver on an opportunity. Sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes it's forcing the wrong people into the wrong room for the wrong reasons. You know, there might be a funding opportunity and people are coming together to deliver a product. So I think, you know, fundamentally for partnerships to be successful, they need to be built on a common ideal, not as an afterthought. Not always. There's always examples of good partnerships that happen by the other way around.
I completely agree with you, Simon. So often we see partnerships forming because there's some money available, as opposed to actually seeing what an issue is, understanding the variety of stakeholders, and then bringing them together around that issue. And that's where you get the greatest value out of partnering. Who would like to go next? Thanks, Suzanne.
I can continue. Yeah, in a nutshell, I would say individual mindsets, because we can change the organizations and we can create the partnerships. And for that, in a nutshell, I once heard somebody say that we need to go from a mindset of being the best in the world to a mindset of being the best for the world. And I think that would naturally lead us to more and better partnerships.
Thank you, Suzanne. And yes, somebody else said about going into partnership conversations, leaving their logos, silos, and egos at the door, which I think is a similar sort of point. It's not about us; it's about what we can collectively do. Martin, and then Flynn.
I actually just want to continue where Susanne started. Yeah, we have to create this intrinsic motivation within organizations, within companies, within institutions. The partnerships have to come to the focus. It must be also something that our leaders have in the mind at any moment, and that they actually support. Yeah, like I mentioned before, we see this too often still, that there is this competitive mindset coming in. Yeah, they don't want to work together with others. They want to be the only ones, and that's not what actually will work out and will bring some work close to where we want to be.
No, thank you. And yes, that's because individuals' mindsets is equivalent to organizational culture when you scale it up to the organization itself. And you're absolutely right. We need to shift the organizational culture here as well. Lynn.
Thank you. I agree with everything that everyone said. Plus, I think data. I think we need to bring data for decision making for partnerships to the point around. I totally agree that we need to work together, but ultimately we need to know what's working, what's not working, so we can adapt, be that as an individual organization in our strategy, but also then as partnerships. So really thinking about what's the data in terms of the objectives that we're trying to achieve, but also what's the health of our partnership. Having that time, coming back, reflecting and actually adapting. And then I think also just realizing to Martin's point, we're trying to do more with the same or less, and often it's more efficient. And actually we're going to get to our results in a more effective way. But actually, if we can frame it as being a good use of people's time rather than just another thing that people have to do on top of their day job, I think would get a long way with partnership. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Flynn. Indeed, looking at the incentives and the measurements to demonstrate what the delivery from these partnerships, I think is going to make a huge difference as well. Thank you very much indeed, panelists. Very much appreciated. I'm hoping some of you might be able to continue on in this next part of the session. And this is now going to move to breakout rooms where we're going to continue to discuss these issues, these questions. And so the way this is going to work is as follows. We have 3 rooms. We have 3 breakout rooms. We're discussing slightly different topics, and you will get to choose which breakout room you want to go into. And the 3 rooms are these. Topic 1 is around partnerships are an essential mechanism to tackle the SDGs and climate change. How can we ensure that partnerships are more fit for purpose and maximize their impact? Topic 2, breakout room 2, is going to be talking more about how multi-stakeholder partnerships can strengthen sustainable business practices. And topic 3, breakout room 3, will look at what can the public sector do to encourage, catalyze and support multi-stakeholder partnerships in support of SDG implementation, and in particular, what kind of examples that you might have. So I've put the 3 topics into the chat, and I'm going to ask my colleague Jordan to basically open up the breakout rooms where we will have 20 minutes. And within each breakout room, there will be a mural in order to be able to capture as much information as possible. Because what we're doing is this is part of the campaign, and we want to get as much from as wide a group of people as possible in terms of any examples you might have of good partnering, enabling practice, any thoughts you have about what's most needed in the world to enable partnerships, etc., etc. So we'll move you to the rooms for 20 minutes, and there will be a moderator in each room, in order to really try to capture as much as possible onto these mural boards. So you will need to choose which one you want to go to. So choose one of these 3 areas now. I think you can just click on it and it will take you to that room. Well, welcome back, everybody. Right, that was obviously a very quick little delve into these quite important, quite major discussions. But let's just get a little bit of feedback from colleagues, and perhaps just because I can see you right there. I think Tom, I believe you're going to be feeding back from the 3rd group. Just a couple of key points coming from the third group.
Hi, Darian. Yes, I was facilitating that group. Yeah, so a couple of thoughts. First of all, it was a difficult topic, and it led me to think and to make my own comment that actually this whole aspect of multi-stakeholder partnering for SDGs around the enabling environment is perhaps one that we all need to understand better. It was difficult for the group to come up with examples, and again, that might be instructive in our research. But we had some nice examples that did come forward. So one was around the sort of science of getting citizen data and sort of that whole kind of crowding in of data for measuring progress against the SDGs, which is a really nice example in one area of this kind of enabling environment. And then another one was, where we have a country such as Germany being a good example, where there are mandated multi-stakeholder partnership structures to actually help the government both with planning for kind of transformational change, which is required, as we know, for the SDGs, but also acting as a critical friend to government as we kind of progress. And so that kind of example hopefully will also come forward in our report that we'll be producing later in the year. So yes, thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Tom, for that very concise analysis. And let's go over to group 2, and Janssen, tell us about a couple of things that you found coming out of group 2.
Yes, yeah, we basically continued a little bit on the discussion of the panel, looking at sustainable business practices, how MSPs or partnerships can support sustainable business practice. And there were some interesting points, speaking also to the panel discussion before, looking at the business case, obviously. So one point was about how can we make sure that the ambition of partners, especially business partners, businesses who are participating in partnerships have a necessarily high ambition. And there the point was made that, of course, the motivation needs a very good business case for each partner, for each stakeholder, to really engage and see the added value it will provide. And if not provide in the current moment, then at least in the future, where they can see that will actually give them an added value and a benefit for their own operations. Then we talked about sustainable business practices in terms of that partnerships should actually enable a change in the partners themselves, so an organizational change, an overall organizational change, not just the CSR department, that is, and that will of course takes time. And that we talked also about that, of course, the different resources partners bring to the table, and especially the different insights partners bring to the table as NGOs, for example, can actually benefit a lot businesses in their sustainable business practices, because they oftentimes focus their resources very specifically and do not have sometimes the broader view, so which NGOs can provide, and the access NGOs can provide to stakeholders on the ground as well. So of course that was also a big discussion point. I think I stop here.
Jansen, thank you so much for that again, and thank you everybody for all of your inputs. Just very briefly from the group that I was in, which was around, we looked at building professional partnering competencies and also the organizational change that's required to become optimized or fit for partnering. And actually what was really interesting is so much of it was around mindset on both levels, the individual and the organizational level. So the need almost for a new generation of managers that don't see zero-sum games, which is what we're used to, but see the idea of collaboration as to move so much further forward than that, and to be able to generate value in different ways. Then, of course, there's just things around putting training into, or putting partnering competencies into university courses, into public policy or into business MBAs, something around ensuring that when you are going into partnership with organizations or about to start negotiating, that you do a training in partnership to get everyone up to a certain level of basic standard of partnering skills, etc. Then on the sort of organizational side, there was also something around ensuring that we know that we understand what partnering means. It's not just about fundraising, and so many organizations have resource mobilization and partnership in the same job. And then there's a whole range of other things that came up as well in terms of ensuring transparency and communication, understanding strengths, ensure that organizational policies are anti-racist, anti-oppressive, including gender equity, to be able to reach out more effectively to others. And we also heard about the need for equitable partnerships as well. And again, that comes into training and mindset as well. With that, I would like to say thank you very much indeed to all of our panel and to all of the participants for your very active discussion just now in the breakout rooms. We will be taking all of this, all of the discussions that we've had, will all begin to feed into this report, really trying to look at, as we've said, how do we scale up these partnerships for sustainable development? And I should say we will be sending a survey out to try to get as much input as possible in the next, probably by the end, well, certainly by the end of next week, but probably at the beginning of next week, we will be sending the survey out to everybody here and widely as well. Thank you all very much indeed, and look forward to seeing you perhaps on a future campaign webinar. Thank you. Bye-bye.